For the first time in human history, our tools, technologies, and systems are moving faster than we are. And if we don't catch up, and I mean catch up rather fast, we stand a chance of kicking off one of the most irreversible, debilitating, and destabilizing crises of our lifetime. These aren't circumstances for anxiety or for panic. It's a moment of responsibility, one where we simply have to do something about it, and that's why we're here today. My name is Kieran, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Blankslate Group, where our focus is on building a more human-centered future of work and business. I also have the esteemed privilege of serving as the head of product and new ventures for Opportunity Hub, with a similar mission of ensuring shared prosperity in the fourth industrial revolution economy. But today, I'm moderating this discussion at the heartbeat of our economic future, Upskilling America. According to the World Economic Forum, upskilling at scale could add $6.5 trillion to our global GDP, a responsibility and opportunity that the United States has a vital role in playing. And today's panel brings together 3 brilliant leaders in this space who aren't just thinking about what's required of the future work and business, but they're actually building solutions to do just that. And before diving into our list of questions today, I'd like to invite each of them to introduce themselves briefly, and we'll start with you, Abby.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to be here. My name's Abby Jo Sigal, and I lead the New York City Mayor's Office for Talent and Workforce Development.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Awesome. My name is Angel Bush, and I am the founder of Black Women in Artificial Intelligence, where our mission is to educate, engage, embrace, and empower Black women in the artificial intelligence sector.
It's hard to follow that up, but I'll try. Good morning. Good morning. So my name is Sheldon Gilbert. I'm the founder and CEO of Kura Labs. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Well, let's get on in with respect to our time today. Abby, we're going to kick things off with you. How is New York City using its scale and diversity to design workforce systems that are inclusive, accessible, and future-ready? And what insights from your approach might help other cities strengthen their own talent ecosystems in this evolving AI-centered digital economy with the rise of AI?
Thank you. That was quite a question to start off the day. So I think, as we've heard, this is like an incredible moment in time. And it's happening fast. And as someone who works in a city that has 8.5 million people, and as our mayor likes to say, 35 million different opinions, and on top of that, multiple different kinds of talent and workforce systems and educational institutions, our goal is to make sure every single New Yorker has not just access but can thrive in a family-sustaining job, and that all our employers have access to the talent they need, not just today but tomorrow, so it's really projecting what that talent is about. And we also have very large institutions. We have a CUNY, City University of New York post-secondary system that serves 500,000 people, about 250,000 in degree programs and another 250 outside of degree programs. We have a public school system that serves close to 1 million students every day. That's pre-K through 12. We also have a really robust nonprofit sector, and each nonprofit sector has a whole bunch of different workforce training providers. The city itself has over 200 different workforce training programs. Additionally, we have a Workforce One system that serves about 100,000 people a year to connect them to opportunities and has physical locations in 18 places across the 5 boroughs. On top of that, we also have our folks at SUNY who are doing a lot of work, as well as the private institutions. And we have an economy that's one of the most diverse sets of industries and needs of talent. So I share all this because it's about scale, but it's also very much about how do you take these institutions that have operated in a certain way over many years and get them ready for and to change at the pace we need them to change as AI disrupts everything we do every day, and particularly disrupts the workforce. So our job is to really find out what is happening in industry in real time. So we have some industry partnerships that do that, including the Tech Talent Pipeline, which works every day with industries to try to understand what's happening and translate that as best we can to the educational and training institutions. We also have similar industry partnerships in healthcare and in green-collar careers, because we know tech and AI is affecting all of that. So we're trying different things. We're learning as much as we go. I do lose sleep over this every day, even though I do see it as an opportunity. I lose sleep because the world is changing incredibly quickly, and our institutions don't change as fast. Industry is changing very quickly and doesn't necessarily have time to even think about how it's changing and trying to translate into what people know. So we really do need our educational and training institutions to be in front of it, to be in audiences and at sessions like Smart Cities to really understand that in real time. But traditionally, that's been siloed. So one of the things we've been really, really pushing is how do we better braid work and learning together so that we can get people, job seekers, students, older adults, because the workforce is growing older adults into the workplace so they can really learn on the job. How do we shift industry thinking, saying we do want to have people in the workplace learning, and how do we make sure we're crediting that learning? So really working with educational institutions to give credit, not just for prior learning, which is so important, but for learning in real time. So I say that credit for concurrent learning, because that's how I think educational institutions are going to be relevant. So really thinking through how do we have, we know it as apprenticeship, but it's fellowships, it's residencies, it's all sorts of things. It doesn't necessarily need to be a registered apprenticeship, but it really needs to be on-the-job learning. And how do we make sure we start doing that not, after a person is laid off as a second chance, but in real time as they're starting a job, as they're upskilling within a job, or as they're in high school, really getting young people into the workplace to see what it's about and learn how and see in real time how people are using AI tools. Because we were having this conversation before, what is really keeping me up at night is like, there's going to be a world where there's folks who really understand AI, can use it, become bionic with it, and then there's going to be the folks who just don't. And if there's too many folks who just don't, that's going to be a huge society problem. It's going to be a huge issue for cities like New York, states, for our overall economy. And so really making sure we're using our public sector convening power, our public sector influence, our public sector investment to try to make sure that everybody's on the side of using AI and becoming bionic. That's what we're trying to do.
I love that so much. Everyone needs to become bionic. I think what I appreciate the most about your work is the skills focus to reimagining the learn, work, and earn model that currently exists in our ecosystem. I guess it's a really great pivot to Sheldon and the work that he's leading in this state as well. Sheldon, your work at Kura Labs is transforming how we prepare underserved communities for high-growth careers in this AI infrastructure, cyber, and smart manufacturing fields projected to grow faster than any other by 2030. With over 12 million U.S. workers expected to shift into entirely new occupations due to automation, what bold systems-level innovations are needed to ensure these opportunities are truly accessible? And how can cities and industries reimagine their workforce strategies to generate not just the talent pipelines, but the real economic opportunities and mobility?
That's a good question. I'll give the short answer first, I'll give the longer answer. The short answer is simulation environments. I'll explain what that means in a second. So I think that look, my impetus for creating Kura Labs as a nonprofit is because I actually come from industry. I come from the tech sector. My background is a bit orthogonal as a molecular genetics. But the reason why I bring that up because it's always been that sort of systems thinking has been really helpful in starting the company that I did. And we were early adopters of cloud computing back in 2011, 2012, which is considered fairly early around that time. Yeah.
The dark ages.
Yeah, exactly. When dinosaurs were roaming Central Park, right? And so when we started doing that, we realized that there were literally no cloud engineers. We spent millions of dollars migrating to the system, couldn't find these engineers. And we found that we weren't alone. There was this massive workforce asymmetry, far more demand than supply of these engineers. So I said, and then fast forward about 5 years later, I said, let me address this issue on the side while still running this full-time tech company. Let me create this vocational school, if you will, for the 21st century. And that's when we started Kura Labs. And what I found there was that there's this massive chasm between industry and academia, and the irony is that this is actually getting exacerbated through AI. And so there's a really important shift that's occurring. The first is, and we're seeing this now, look, for the longest time, people who actually could program, we felt like we could walk on water. So there's a degree of haughtiness that they assembled during this time. That's changed overnight. That's like now the shelf life of like a copyright editor at the New York Times. So everyone's panicking. And so the shift is, we're seeing a shift from being a software engineer, a programmer, those days are gone, to what I call being a systems engineer. And what a systems engineer really entails is, I call it effectively, you need to basically be this hybrid, this chimera between thinking like a technical architect and also having an MBA. Because you got to think along the entire stack. You've got to think about understanding the actual silicon, the chips, the semiconductors that the programs are running on, so you understand like the semiconductor layer. Then you've got to understand the infrastructure and the data center and the server layer. Then you have to understand the GPU programming layer, and then the data layer, and the agentic layer, and then the business operations and financial and compliance and GDPR layer. You got to understand all of that now to really get a job and to be adept in these roles and understand how it impacts the entire organization. And so the current academic model was barely designed for that first generation. It is going to be significantly dislocated in this new form. And so in order to actually have effective and functional systems engineers, they have to be availed to the very systems that they have to work on. So at Kura Labs, when we started training engineers to becoming cloud infrastructure engineers, cybersecurity engineers, the very platforms we were training them on were economically prohibitive because these systems charge you by the hour. So we literally could not train people because it would cost tens of thousands of dollars nearly per student to train them for these very jobs. So we had to create this whole new mechanism anyway. But to actually get these jobs, and we were talking about this earlier, as we could see, entry-level jobs are now becoming extinct. And that's deeply problematic, particularly in these areas of tech. And so they're asking, so where are people going to get that functional experience? So you actually, now organizations, institutions, governments have to invest in these simulation environments to start training people. Not unlike flight simulators, right? The military and defense spends a lot of money in simulation environments. We have to do the very same things for these jobs. That's it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that probably, given my work in this across the state of Missouri when we were driving the Missouri Tech First effort, we found the exact same reality where it was less of our people, or our learner ecosystem, if you will, our worker ecosystem not wanting to get started. It was no one giving them a crawl, walk, run playbook to step into this space, to understand what does it feel like to build, launch, and scale a product. As you shared, what does that product stack, that technical stack look like that I need to be equipped with to future-proof my life, to ensure my economic well-being throughout this life and this next, throughout this era of so much significant changes, new generation of tech tools being born every single day on our timelines. So I just commend you for your boldness, for stepping into that space, and for helping to close this gap in the ecosystem. And someone else who's doing some brilliant work in closing gaps is Angel Bush here, and so I think this question will be well suited for you. You're leading vital conversations around workforce development solutions, and given your work, and how do we build, from your vantage point, obviously, a AI-enabled workforce that is industry-aligned with pathways that don't just perpetuate bias, while also extending the invitation to leaders and communities to contribute to shape, but also contribute, to leaders and communities having the opportunity to contribute. And where do you see the greatest potential for AI to unlock this mobility at scale?
That's a long question.
A little layer.
So I'm going to say this. For Black women in artificial intelligence, we're focused on AI workforce development solutions. And let me explain what that means. I am from Houston, Texas, and I consider Houston, Texas the greatest city in America. Ooh. And so walk with me now. There is a purpose of me mentioning Houston. Just give me a second. I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan. Saginaw, Michigan is very small. Currently, there are about 48,000 people. And I moved to Houston. Houston, there may be 4 million, 5 million people. Totally different, right? And so when I moved to Houston, they were trying to explain to me, people would try to explain to me, go here, go there, drive here, drive there. And as they're explaining it to me, they said, Angel, take the feeder and then get on the freeway. And in Saginaw, there is not a feeder. And so I could not understand the concept of this feeder. And they said, Angel, the feeder feeds the freeway. And so you're probably saying, okay, what does that have to do with AI? What it has to do with AI and in terms of Black women in AI and what we're creating, workforce development solutions, is that we're creating the feeder to these other organizations. Because what's missing, someone said, when you build, fill the gap. And what is missing is teaching individuals who don't understand AI. If we start with AWS, if we start people with Microsoft Azure, if we start people with NVIDIA's Deep Learning Institute, and this is not a knock against those organizations because Black women in AI, we have a partnership with all of them. My purpose is, and my point is, we have to start at the beginning so that when they're taking these courses, and we're developing courses for individuals to learn AI. So before they get to AWS, before they get to Microsoft, we are the feeder to that freeway. We're teaching them what is artificial intelligence. It's simply systems created to mimic human intelligence. What does deploy mean before they get to Microsoft Azure? What do all of these things mean? What does the algorithm mean? It's a set of instructions. And so if we don't teach people at the very beginning, they can't get to AWS, they can't get to Microsoft, they can't get to NVIDIA because they don't understand the language. And so what Black Women in AI is doing, we're filling that gap. And if you don't fill the gap, what's going to happen is you're going to have a workforce that will be in trouble. They're going to be in trouble when they're trying to find these jobs. For those of you of a certain age, you may understand that back in the day, we used to walk into a grocery store and there was someone actually there to help us, to ring up the groceries. But now they have this concierge model where you do it yourself. That's AI. And so understand, in order for us to get here, we have to start at the beginning. We have to teach the students and the adults who are pivoting or preparing to pivot. We need to start at the beginning so that they can understand how to be a part of this AI economy. And Black women in AI, we are filling that gap.
I salute your work always, and I think being that translation point, if you will, that really offers an opportunity for, I think, context, identity, and this new technical acumen to be shored up under this umbrella, I think is so important to the world that we're moving in. And as I shared with you before, we probably need a Black men in AI, other groups to have our own kind of, other worlds as well. But you have a thought?
Well, I just want to highlight, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's one of the things that we're focused on too, and I want to give credit to, we have the New York City Workforce Development Council and Board, and one of the committees is the future of work, which everyone's talking about, but NYC, so really understanding what it means to NYC, to be, as AI and tech and other changes happen, how that plays out in this city particularly. And so we partnered, our Tech Talent Pipeline partnered with that committee, as well as the New York Jobs CEO Council and the Borough of Manhattan Community College to really develop a coursework. It's just the beginning, but like 5 sessions for people not in tech to understand AI, because it's not just for the NVIDIAs, Microsofts, it's for all of us. And I'm so excited because we've had 2 sessions of it, and the second session on Friday, we're going to have sort of the Shark Tank of the students and really seeing how much they learned and how much they absorbed through this. And it was really done in partnership with industry. So that needs to happen to fill those gaps, to get those feeders across every school and every training program and every industry and employer that's really trying to build their talent pipeline.
Exactly. We're in a state where, for those of you who may remember, there was this thing called No Child Left Behind. I'm sure you remember that. And so we're at the point where we're saying we don't want any community to be left behind in this AI revolution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But I think, again, there's something, I forget the gentleman who wrote the book *Sapiens*, was it Yuval Harari? He said something I thought was really poignant, which is saying everyone's referring to AI as a tool. This is not a tool. I mean, fire was a tool, the wheel was a tool. This actually has agency. So that means that you are developing something that at some point will become autonomous and start making decisions on its own. And so the seismic shift here is, and as we're trying to create these feeder systems, guess what? Here's the reality. The number of people that will be hired will shrink significantly, and that means that the people that are there are now become deeply specialized, but also now they are surrounded by these agentic teams, these agentic fleets. In the future, it's not about hiring Angel. It's going to be hiring Angel and her fleet of agents that are working alongside her. So whether you're an accountant, you're a financial advisor, you are a surgical assistant, you, as part of your LinkedIn profile, you have to imagine you will have to come with your own pod or fleet of agents. That is a radical shift. And there's not a single academic institution or training institution, a vocational school, a boot camp, that is even thinking along those lines. This is sort of where we are really dialed in, is this sort of agentic workforce. And we are here now. And so we have to start thinking about how do we start training not just the person, but them and their fleet of agents to actually, and so that means that the notion, if you think about this, if you sort of carry this to its logical extension, what's the idea of a company? A company is nothing but a constellation of agentic fleets. Your HR department, your marketing department, and so forth. So we have to invert our thinking.
No, I love that thought. I think it really lends itself to the reality that many of us are going to, regardless of our profession, really think about the power of becoming high-growth company builders. And so that means really learning the art and science of building, launching, and scaling high-growth practices so that as we do step into this new world, we know what we know, we're confident in it, and that our domain expertise is input into these tools, into these models, so that our voice, our case study expertise, again, is logged into these tools. Because I think the one thing that maybe we haven't just broken down into just simple terms is like these tools are just that they're inputs and output systems. So what you know to add in it is going to dictate how valuable that those outputs and outcomes are. So I say that to reassure people in the room that as terrifying as it is, I think that knowing what you know and standing in that is going to be probably the most important thing that we do to sever ties with fear as we see these. We see these.
I mean, you
tools.
still need a human in the loop to manage financial liability, legal liability.
Absolutely.
Right. So
And values, and making sure we're addressing the core values of, and that's why I love what you do and what you all do is in terms of human-centered design. Like, how do we make this new reality really work to better the human condition? Like, we have to make sure that is lifted up every time we have this conversation.
So with that, I'm going to get to our question that's going to be open to the floor here. So given the importance of talent and this human capital, this human-centered approach to this work, how do we shift the perspective from stakeholders seeing workforce development of these type of initiatives as a cost or some outlandish expenditure and rather to an investment opportunity? And the floor is open for either of you to take that one.
I would say that first, let's go back a little bit. AI is not new. It's not new, nor is workforce development. It's been around for years and years and years. And you're going to need to have someone that is forward-thinking when it comes to artificial intelligence. And you're going to have someone who's willing to buy in, but also learn, because we may be surrounded by leaders who are not sure about AI themselves, And so it becomes difficult for them to lead the conversation when they're telling an administrative assistant, just as an example, okay, I want you to learn AI. I want you to learn A, B, C, and D, although we can automate your job. So understand that when we're doing these things, when we're talking about AI and we're talking about stakeholders, we are all stakeholders in this. And so it has to be an investment, but there is a cost. There's going to be a cost in terms of the human capital. There's going to be a cost in terms of healthcare. If I can create an automated administrative assistant, then guess what? The administrative assistant, it's not going to be one for one. The administrative assistant, I no longer need. Why? Because guess what? I don't have to pay health care. I don't have to pay insurance. I don't have to worry about days off. So understand when we're having these conversations, they're important conversations, and yes, the jobs will be replaced, but it will not be a one-for-one. If you needed 3 people to clean the bathroom or to clean this hall, now we only need 2 robots. So we have to understand the cost, and there will be a cost, whether it's healthcare, whether it's homes, whether it's where people will live, and how they feel about what's happening. But don't allow AI to happen to you. Be a part of shaping AI, and then you will understand the investment.
Very well said.
So, I mean, a couple of thoughts that I have on this. One is that, I mean, first and foremost, I think Andrew Yang's right. We're going to be, we have to have, I don't know, I mean, I don't know if it's going to be universal basic income, but there has to be a sort of restructuring about sort of like workforce compensation for sure. There has to be sort of a revisitation of that model. But one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is that when you start thinking about so we all aware about the massive energy consumption of these next generation data centers, although DeepSeek sort of has changed that, but those are distillation models. They're still riding on foundational models that still require enormous amounts of energy. I think the requirement is about 34 gigawatts, and I think the current capacity is about 17, so we got to double that. And so there's a whole notion now of creating specialized data centers, some that are just designed for training, some that are for inference. But the interesting thing to think about is around edge computing. And so the idea that your fridge itself starts doing inferences, it has to do so quickly, or if you're a surgeon performing robotic surgery, you can't actually have that robot make a call back to the data center about in a different country because the latency is too important for that procedure. So how do you actually do like localized computations? And so what does that mean for the public? What does that mean that the car in your garage is a localized data center, or your refrigerator, or your microwave? And so I start thinking a lot about how do we sort of democratize edge computing, and how do we sort of compensate people, whether it's a cooperative model where people actually now have storage, they've got compute, they actually have power and electrification. We have to start considering those things because we can't actually have all that concentrated in about 7 companies, right? So I think there's an opportunity that we have to really revisit about because the movement here is towards decentralization. And how do we decentralize compute? How do we decentralize electrification and data consumption?
As long as the word monetization is built into that all, when we think
well,
about...
that's the implicit understanding.
Yeah, I love, I mean, just listening to both of you speak. I'm learning so much just sitting on the stage here. So I think we don't know exactly how it's going to play out. We do know that there's going to be fewer entry-level opportunities, and so therefore there's more difficulty creating career pathways for people, so things like simulation is going to be super important. We also know that the way the structure of the economy is going to shift, so it could be that there may be more jobs, they're just very different jobs, and what you need to be successful in those jobs are a very different set of skills, and it's happening very fast. So when I think about it, investment versus cost is too often we think of education as a cost, we think of training as a cost, but it's actually an investment because every study shows that if you invest in people, it comes in and returns on the dollar of like 4 or 5, 6, 10 to 1. if I could do that investment, I'd be doing it every day. But we're not doing it every day. And those investments often don't even take into account the negative externalities of what happens when you don't invest in people. And we see those negative externalities in the healthcare system. We see it in what's happening in terms of homelessness. We see it in so many multiple ways on the individual and community level. So we just need a better framing. We need better case making and value proposition of why you really have to put talent and people at the center. I mean, this is probably the first time I've been on a stage where I haven't said, as my opening remarks, our most important asset in New York City is our talent. It's our people. It's our people who are here. It's the people who come here from all over the globe to be here. And without our people, we are not New York City. And we will never, we are the greatest city in the world, but we won't continue to be the global capital unless we continue to invest in our people and attract people. And so how do we get that to be the framing to make sure we can hold our public institutions accountable for not just investing in what they've always done in the past, but really investing in what needs to happen in the future?
Yeah, I'll say this to that last point you made about like that cost. I know that in the state of Missouri, we found that it was costing $10 billion per annum to continue to have talent underutilized and undertrained. And so that is where the investment started, when people had to start looking across their state budgets, when institutions had to start looking at what they were losing. Only through that economic framing and lens were we really able to get people to move the needle on this very critical time they work. And when you start talking about being competitive across states or on a global stage, now you're going to get our people, our leaders and people with that fiduciary power to start, I think, shifting their interests to how they train, how they lead, and how they open the floodgates of opportunity for this newly minted talent that's showing up. So I want to give one last question, then hopefully we have a little bit of time to take some questions from the audience. What's one bold or controversial belief that you hold about the future of work and business or cities, a truth that you stand by, even if it disrupts conventional thinking? And feel free to say something that will disrupt some conventional thinking today, actually. Let's shake the room up a little bit.
I guess I'll go first. I don't know whether this is controversial or not, but what I will share with you is this. Last week, I was on a panel at NVIDIA, and it's a major tech company for those of you who are not familiar with NVIDIA. And Black Women in AI, we took in a delegation. And we went last year. There was no requirement. This year, I required our members to build. And I told them, I don't care what you build. It can be the latest doorbell. I don't really care, as long as you build. And this is something that we must do. We have to get outside of our comfort zones and build. Oftentimes we have these conversations, and I'm going to say this, and this is going to be controversial, and you've heard this before. We talk about seats at the table and being in the room. And last year I said, I don't want to be at a table that does not include power, authority, or influence. But I gave myself enough grace to change my perspective. And so in this past year, I realized that I don't want to simply just be in the room. I don't simply want to have a seat at the table, even if it includes power, authority, or influence. Because what I've come to understand is that by the time I walk into the room, it has already been decided how much power I will have. By the time I walk into the room, it has already been decided where I will sit. By the time I walk into the room, it has already been decided how long I can speak. So I'm not interested in being in the room. I am not interested at sitting at the table with power, authority, or influence. What's important to me is being in the lab. Because in the lab is where the black box resides. In the lab is where the magic happens. In the lab is where I can understand the algorithm. And if you don't understand who is creating the algorithm, you will be in trouble. And so if I'm going to be bold, if I'm going to be courageous, if this is going to be something that is controversial, don't give me a seat at the table because I'm in the lab. So don't look for me at the table. Look for me in the lab.
White coats coming soon.
That's tough to follow. So let's just take a moment, Angel. Yeah, I thought being in the lab or creating the room, right? You want to make sure you're creating the room. I think for me, there's so many things that I think. A friend of mine has a column. It started back in the dark ages as just a website. Now it's like a Medium or whatever. It's sort of stating the obvious, right? And so for me, I'm constantly having this conversation, particularly with educators in academia and educational institutions, particularly when I tell them, I think you all are frogs in boiling water. You better figure out a way to get out and do it. I really fundamentally believe the best learning that happens in the workplace and in outside of the classroom. I think the classroom's super important for reflection, thinking about how you're processing what you're learning. I think it's good because we do need to have some way to measure skills and accreditation, not the way we do it today, like the idea that we just have our academic institutions getting accredited by other academics and not by industry, at least, if not entirely, but at least at the table or in the room or in the lab. It's hugely problematic, and we're seeing that in real time. But we do need something so an individual can take their learnings and experience in a particular place and make that translatable to another place and not just at the whim and beck of the particular employer. So there's an opportunity there. But unless we really start braiding earning and learning and credentialing in a fundamentally new way, and it's in some ways back to the future. It's going back to an apprenticeship model that's flexible and adaptable, but really make sure that there is credentialing and competencies in real time that are needed for today and tomorrow. Making sure there's the mentoring. We haven't said this. You said this earlier. We all know how people get jobs, and more often than not, it's who you know. So how do you make sure we're extending professional networks beyond just a few, but to folks from every borough, block, and building in the city and elsewhere? And really making sure that we are that these apprenticeships aren't just for trades, but very much for every single occupation that powers a local economy, a state economy, or the country's economy, and that those are transparent and accessible to everybody who's interested, is where we need to get to. And we are far from that. I mean, we did an announcement in the city to get 30,000 apprenticeships by 2030. Now, there's 4.5 million workers in New York City. I mean, that was like doubling and tripling the apprenticeship, and we'll do it. We already hit 15,000. But that number should be, 10 times that at least, and it should be just the way we're doing it. So that, to me, is like one of the key things. So maybe it's not so controversial. It's just how we get there is going to take huge mind shifts.
I've been told I have like 17 seconds. Is that what I have right now on going last? I'm all about the labs. That's why it's in our name, Kura Labs. So that's our entire premise. You saw what I just did there, right? You good? Okay. So I'd say the two things that I think about it. I'm sure I don't know a lot of people think about these things, but the two things. One is that no one's talked about this really, but this to me I thought was a massive shift, which is that when DeepMind AI basically solved all the protein folding structures. No one's talking about that. That's going to revolutionize. That's the hardest. Before that was considered to be a computationally intractable problem. There are more combinations than there are stars in the universe and all that stuff. It solved that. The next generation is going to be proteomics, and that means that literally we're going to, I believe in the next 20 years, we'll find the cure for cancer. That's going to happen because the proteomic and metabolomic level. That's going to be revolutionary. Okay. The other thing I think about, too, is like most of our geopolitical lines are driven by access to resources, in particular fossil fuels and oil. I think it's now going to be redrawn as a function of electrification for powering data centers because of the limited capacity. So we're going to have to literally think about, do we do all of our training in Australia and shipping the weights over to the United States for inference modeling. So it's an interesting model to think about, but I think it's going to be redrawn based on electrical power for AI data centers. That's my bit.
I want to thank you all for your brilliance. We're just give them a round of applause for this timely discussion, and again, one that is really at the heartbeat of our future and where we go from here now. And so my challenge to you all is to get in the lab, be at the table, show up with a level of fearlessness and an appetite for innovation that this country needs, that your region deserves, and that your future self really deserves. And so with that, we're going to conclude Upskilling America segment. Again, Kieran Blanks, feel free to connect on LinkedIn or any other channels. We thank you again for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.